Hey everyone, and welcome to chapter 15. Now, this is the last chapter of this class, and we're going to take a deep dive into the monetary policy tools that the Fed has available. And in this video, we're going to talk specifically about what the goal of monetary policy even is. So, we're going to talk about all the different objectives that the Fed is trying to juggle, and then we're going to go deep into what we call the Fed's dual mandate. So, very simplistically speaking, there are six monetary policy goals set by the Fed, and all of these are intended to promote economic well being. So, first we have price stability, second is high employment, third is economic growth, fourth is the stability of financial markets and institutions, fifth is interest rate stability, and sixth is foreign exchange market stability. And we're going to talk about each one independently, but notice that with the exception of number two and three, we're talking exclusively about stability. So the Fed, as opposed to fiscal policy, is not promoting strong economic growth, etc. It's really just trying to act as a sort of balance to make sure that things are stable and working properly in the economy. So, as we've discussed, when we look at price stability, inflation can always hurt markets because it erodes the value of a person's income, and severe inflation has extremely large costs. And when we look at the opposite side, deflation, as we talked about, could be even worse. And so, because of that, the Fed sets a target inflation rate of 2% per year. So there's a couple of reasons why the Fed chose 2%. First off, we need to remember that classically speaking, we consider what we call the Phillips curve to be a relationship between inflation and unemployment. When there's low unemployment, there's high inflation because inflation is associated with strong economic growth. If you remember back to our very simple derivation of what inflation is, the more currency that's being circulated, the higher inflation will be. And so that usually goes hand in hand with employment. And then there's a couple of reasons why specifically 2%. First, it's pretty hard to accurately measure inflation. So the 2% target is probably actually closer to 1%. Also, deflation is considered to be substantially more destabilizing than inflation at the same magnitude. So an inflation rate of 2% is substantially better for the US economy than a deflation rate of 2%. Again, additionally, when we add a little bit of inflation to our economy, that usually means that we're dropping unemployment to go along with it. Speaking of unemployment, we're not going to look at the objective of high employment. Now, this is a classic misnomer that you hear a lot of politicians talk about, and you've probably had this clarified in your previous economic classes. High U.S. employment is obviously the objective of, or one of the objectives of all branches of the federal government. However, economists do never target 0% unemployment. That is actually extremely unhealthy for an economy. So when you hear politicians talking about we should all target 0%, that actually is extremely unhealthy. And the reason for that is because there's actually three subtypes of unemployment. There's frictional unemployment, which is just unemployment caused by workers moving to a different job. So whenever a college student leaves college and enters into the workforce, that's considered frictional unemployment. If an investment banker wants to settle down because they want to start a family and don't want to work 60, 70 hours a week, then that is frictional unemployment. Then there's structural unemployment, and this is unemployment caused by changes in the structure of the economy. So, a couple big examples of this are from development of the economy and from seasonal workers. So, I'm a big skier. My buddy works at a ski resort in the wintertime, and so every single spring he becomes unemployed. That's no fault of the economy. That's just by the structure of certain jobs and the job that he chose to take. Alongside, you hear a lot about manufacturing jobs being lost. A lot of that has to do with the restructuring of the manufacturing industry to promote technology and have more automation in the manufacturing process. So these are types of structural unemployment. Once again, pretty healthy for the economy. The real worry of unemployment is cyclical unemployment. And this is unemployment caused by business cycle recession. So whenever you hear about unemployment hitting like 10% in 2008, that is because of the business cycle. And that is obviously not what uh, the Fed wants to promote. So all healthy economies have a certain amount of unemployment because of the first two. If there wasn't frictional unemployment, first, that means that we wouldn't be letting people switch jobs, which is quite unhealthy. And additionally, that means that our economy is capped because a company can no longer grow by adding additional workers. So when you hit zero frictional unemployment, we're just rooting the entire economy into one place. Additionally, structural unemployment once again means that we're capping economic growth because we're not allowing firms to develop. Additionally, we're not allowing for seasonal and other types of unemployment to occur. And so, once again, that is not the signal of actually a healthy economy. And so that's why saying we want to target 0% unemployment is just frankly a little bit misinformed. However, what should be what we call full employment or the natural rate of unemployment is up for a lot of debate. There's really no magical formula. However, uh, mostly based and rooted in the original Phillips curve, 4% for a long time has been considered to be about the ideal number, but we actually dipped below 4% in 2018 and 2019, and we didn't see any significant economic problems. Particularly, we didn't see inflation start to rise uncontrollably. And so the Fed has stopped openly targeting 4% unemployment. So maybe, like I said, there's a lot of debate where it is about whether or not it may be 3.5%, et cetera. And maybe there is not a true number, but a lot of it depends on economic circumstances. And speaking of economic circumstances, another objective of monetary policy is indeed economic growth. And this is, a quite simple goal, but it is a little bit differentiated from fiscal policy and what politicians try and achieve because the Fed targets stable economic growth instead of strong economic growth because oftentimes extremely high rates of economic growth are not sustainable in the long term and can lead to very dire circumstances, including high inflation and very deep recessions that are associated with bubbles. And so the Fed's objective is actually to maybe, reel in that economic growth to get a more stable, long-term sustainable growth metric. Uh, then let's look at the stability of financial markets and institutions. And this is the goal that we alluded to a lot during the 2007 recession. So the Fed, it really was created just as a response to financial panics. Obviously, it grew way beyond that, but this is arguably one of the most simple and original goals of the Federal Reserve. Because if you remember back in our history, the Fed was created in response to the 2007 financial crisis. And so, once again, here we're not looking at strong numbers. The Fed's main objective when looking at financial markets and institutions is to back up these institutions and generate enough of a response to withstand deep recessions, both proactively and reactively. So that includes a certain amount of high cooperation and control over these banks in even good economic times, but also responding quickly and aggressively in times of economic recession. And this really became a focal point of the Fed in the 1930s, since a lot of what happened in the Great Recession is considered to be at least partly the Fed's fault for not responding to the bank panics that just drove America into the ground. And that is why the FOMC was created in its modern form in 1935. Then finally, a couple last objectives: interest rate stability and forex market stability. They're kind of hand in hand, so we have them on the same slide here. Interest rate stability focuses on planning and future investment decision making. So the Fed wants to make sure interest rates are stable in the medium and long term, because nobody wants to take out a long term loan if they feel like it may expose them to substantial interest rate risk. So by keeping interest rates stable, the Fed is trying to promote longer term loans and longer term uh, uh, deals. It also helps households and businesses because it gives them a more stable price point that they can feel is they're able to plan around. Then the forex market is a little bit of a convoluted topic in this context, but the Fed wants to stabilize the forex market by coordinating with the Treasury, because we want to welcome foreign investment and exports. So we want to facilitate this international exchange. And so it is, when all else held equal, advantageous for the Fed to try and stabilize the US currency against other currencies, at least other healthy currencies, so that we can keep prices stable here in the United States. But when you think about all that what we just talked about, we can really boil it down to just two objectives: price stability and high employment. But the problem is if you remember what I just said, these two kind of go against each other. If we have 0% inflation and steady costs, then we may not have high employment, and we may expose ourselves to deep recession cycles if one thing goes wrong in the US economy. So in front of you, I pulled some Fred data, and this is just graphing the US unemployment rate against the CPI in the United States since 1945. And so, for those of you that don't know, the CPI is just how we index inflation here in the US. So, as you can see, while not perfect, we actually can see, especially in these healthy post recession periods, a pretty strong justification for the inverse relationship between inflation and employment. So, when we see employment rise, we have uh, and when we have unemployment rise, we have inflation drop right after in the mid 1950s, once again in the 60s. Then when we look at the 70s, when we start getting a more modern economy, opposite side in the first oil crisis, where we had huge inflation, and then unemployment actually was dropping a little bit during a lot of that before unemployment skyrocketed, and sure enough, inflation dropped. Then as we shift to more modern times, you have the dot-com bubble bursting in 2001 and 9/11. And once again, inflation drops, unemployment rises, and then things start to get back together. Then in the financial crisis, we actually briefly had deflation and extremely high rates of unemployment. So there is strong justification that price stability and high employment actually go a little bit against each other. And so this is what we call the Fed's dual mandate, is how they balance the two of them. So usually they have what's called the dual mandate bullseye, and this is pulled directly from the Chicago Fed website, where they usually are trying to target. The bullseye is right about 4.2% in this picture, with an inflation rate of still 2%, the same objective the Fed has had since 2012. And then you start to get into a danger area when you get into the blue area of the bullseye. And this shows exactly how it works, where you can see as unemployment gets dangerously low, inflation starts to skyrocket exponentially. And then on the flip side, when inflation gets too low, unemployment starts to skyrocket. And so, uh, as I mentioned, the natural rate of unemployment is always going to be an argument among economists, but there are a couple reasons that we need unemployment in the US economy, both from a future economic growth perspective as well as controlling for inflation within the economy. And it's dealing with these two contrasting ideas, trying to stabilize these financial systems and promoting strong economic growth, while at the same time not letting inflation get out of control. That is the consistent, constant dual mandate that the Fed has.